This video is all about how blood circulates through the heart. In other words, how does it get from the body into the heart, then from the heart out to the lungs to get some oxygen, back from the lungs with oxygen, and then out to the rest of the body to start all over again. So best thing we should do is probably familiarize ourselves with all the various parts of the heart. We've got them labeled 1 through 9 here, so I'm going to go ahead and label that. I'll just pause. You can check and make sure that you know all those various parts. All right, so hopefully you recognize all those parts. Just a couple of quick things. In blue, I've listed all those parts of the heart that contain deoxygenated blood. Essentially, that's anything on this side of the heart would be deoxygenated. And that is labeled as the right side of the heart, even though as you're looking at it, it's on the left side of your screen. Well, that's because this heart, if it's inside of a person, what you'd be looking at here is the person's right-hand side, not your right-hand side, but from the perspective of the person's heart, that is their right. Now, over on the left side of the heart, which is the right side of your screen, you've got all these parts over here that are on the right side of the heart. On the left side, right side of your screen, left side of the heart, and those all contain oxygenated blood. So, as long as you know all the various parts of the heart, just a couple things to point out here real quick. The various chambers of the heart are separated by valves. So right here we've got a valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle. It's called the right AV valve. We have a similar valve over on the left side of the heart. That's not it. Right here. Right here between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So that'd be the left AV valve. And that prevents blood from flowing back from a ventricle into an atrium, which would be backwards. You want to go from the atrium to the ventricle. We also have semilunar valves. We have one here on the left side, and we've got one here on the right side, and that prevents blood that's exiting the heart from draining backwards back into the heart. So in Science 30, you just need to know that there are 4 valves at the heart. They prevent backflow of blood. They make sure the blood flows in the correct direction. You don't need to know the names of them. You do need to be able to recognize them when you see them. All right, so the point of this is to figure out circulation through the heart. So we got all the parts of the heart nailed down here. Now I'm just going to erase these parts, and we're just going to look at circulation of blood through. And we're going to start with blood that's coming back from the body, lacking oxygen, that's going to arrive in the heart. And it's going to arrive in the right atrium through the vena cava. So it's going to be coming down from the head there. It's going to be going up this way, and you can't see it because it's in behind, but it's going to come out and drain down here into the right atrium. The right atrium is going to squeeze. It's going to push, and as it pushes, it's going to open up this valve right here, and it's going to push the blood right into the right ventricle. Then the ventricle is going to contract, and when the ventricle contracts, the blood can't go past this valve again. It's not going to go that way. It's going to get deflected, and it's going to come up this way, and it's going to go out through the pulmonary artery and off to, on this side over here, it's going to go off to the left lung, and over here, it's going to go in behind here and go off to the right lung. And while it's at the lungs, it's going to pick up oxygen, and it's going to circulate through those lungs, gain that oxygen, and it's going to come back. And it's going to come back from the lungs through here and come out here. So it's going to go through the pulmonary vein. And it's also from the other side. You'll see it kind of in behind here. It'll come through. But there's 4 of these pulmonary veins, and they will all drain blood into the left atrium. The left atrium will then squeeze and push the blood past the left AV valve and into the ventricle, where the ventricle will then contract and push blood past the semilunar valve, and then in behind here, it's going to go up to the aorta, which is going to go up to the head and the arms, and also blood's going to go in behind the heart. You can't see it. A little bit of the aorta you can see there, but the aorta continues down out to the rest of the body, where the oxygen's going to get dropped off, and then it's going to come back, and it's going to start all over again. It's going to come back into the heart, and it'll start all over. Now, the way I've described it is there's 4 major events. The right atrium contracts. Then the right ventricle contracts. Then the left atrium contracts. Then the left ventricle contracts. But we all know from listening to our own heartbeat contains 2 parts, not 4. So how does that work? You've got 4 chambers, each contracting, and each contraction you would think you would feel as part of your heartbeat. Well, the reason you only feel two parts of your heartbeat is that all of this, two of the chambers are contracting simultaneously. In other words, at exactly the same time that the left atrium is pushing blood through to the right atrium is pushing blood to the right ventricle, the left atrium is pushing blood to the left ventricle, meaning that the contraction that occurs here that pushes in on this is happening over here. It's the same contraction at the same time pushing in on this, and the two atria contract simultaneously, and that would just make one sound as technically as the semilunar valves here and here snap shut when that happens. Then, when the ventricles contract, well, the right ventricle will contract at precisely the same time. I guess that should be blue. That will contract precisely the same time as the left ventricle pushing blood out the aorta. So this contraction of this ventricle and this contraction of this ventricle occurs simultaneously, pushing that blood out. That snaps the AV valves closed, and that makes the second sound of the heartbeat. So that's why you only hear two sounds and not four. Now, what do they typically ask on a Science 30 diploma exam about the various parts of the heart? Well, let's check out. Here's an old exam question from a previous Science 30 exam. So the first question we have here is a numerical response item, and it's asking us about, well, tells us the heart pumps both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Which structures labeled with blood above contain oxygenated blood? So we just need to remember that the oxygenated blood is always over on the left-hand side of the heart over here. So the structures that would contain that, well, it would contain the the vein that is carrying blood from the lungs and back in. So it's going to be number 3 for sure. So we can put number 3 there because that's coming back from the lungs. That's going to enter into the left atrium. I apologize for that. So that's going to be structure number 4, which is then going to pass the blood past the AV valve into the left ventricle, which is structure number 5, which is then going to squeeze the blood past this valve right here and out the aorta and out to the rest of the body. So that would be structure number 1. So we would go 3, 4, 5, 1. It doesn't ask us for any particular order for that, so we'd be fine with that order. Watch out though, sometimes questions will ask you to put it in ascending numerical order. Well, then we'd have to go 1, 3, 4, 5, going up from 1 to 5. All right, but those are the 4 parts that would contain the oxygenated blood. That's a fairly straightforward question. Now let's look at the next one here. Try to keep the question on the screen without losing the picture of the heart. So it says when blood flows through the lungs, or from the lungs, through the heart, to the body tissues, it travels through respectively the blank. So respectively, that's a pretty important word here. Respectively means in order, so we have to get this in order correctly. So we can start wherever. It's a cycle, so it doesn't matter really where we start. If we start with an atrium, that makes sense. So we start with an atrium here, and we start with an atrium here. In part A, it says that would flow through a ventricle, so that's correct. Blood would end up down in the ventricles here, and then it would go out through the aorta according to this one. So it says blood is flowing from the lungs through the heart to the body tissues. So the aorta would carry it out to the body tissues, which means answer A, everything looks to be in order there. But let's take a look at the other ones and see why those ones don't work. B says that blood coming from the lungs would enter first a ventricle. Well, it can't enter the ventricle first, not without going through the AV valves here and here, so it would have to have gone through structures 4 and 7 before it gets into 6 and 5. So we can't have B. Answer C says that it goes into the aorta first. Well, that means the blood would be flowing the wrong way through that valve and then into a ventricle, not into an atrium, so can't be that one, going the wrong way. And then we've got answer D, going into an atrium first, which makes sense, okay, from the lungs to an atrium. In this case, it'd be this atrium is coming from the lungs. But then it says to the aorta, and then into the ventricle, but it's the ventricle and then the aorta in that order. So that one doesn't work. So we're left with answer A for this one.